So, okay, so a couple of announcements first. Got more than just one. Just a reminder, I think I've said it to the group before, but some of you know Bill Parker. Bill Parker passed away recently. He was a long time involved in this group. He was our treasurer for many years. He was always here, very active. He passed away, unfortunately, God rest his soul. His memorial service is this Saturday here, 2 o'clock visitation, and 3 o'clock is the service. So those of you who want to come to that and pay your respects to the family, that would be most welcome. And then next week, we have John Conrad. You've heard him before. He talks about activities with NASA. I believe the correct thing, he's a NASA ambassador, which is a person that goes around, tells about NASA. He'll give us more on his background, but he will talk to us about lunar reflections. He's always very interesting. He's done 2 presentations before on Zoom when we were primarily on Zoom then. He will be here in person next week. So that's good. Okay, so we got that. Now, one administrative housekeeping thing. Yesterday, a series of emails came out from Elizabeth Breck and or Charles Glanville. Did any of you receive such an email? Nobody, okay. Only a couple of us then, because I did. If you look at your email, if you haven't checked your email since yesterday and you get an email from either Charles Glanville or Elizabeth Breck, you're a couple, then it's a scam. It ends up being a scam. It starts out saying, Charles says, I broke my ankle. I don't know what would follow if you responded to it. The one under Elizabeth's name says, I slipped on my walk. They seem to know, I don't know if they know that Elizabeth and Charles did a lot of walking, but they were avid walkers, so it made sense. It says, I slipped and fell yesterday on my walk, injured my leg. Turns out it was a broken femur. I'm in the hospital. I will have surgery tomorrow, meaning today. So that one was very innocent. So I replied to it and I said, oh, so sorry to hear, Elizabeth. Is there anything I can do to help you? Yeah.
Money.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, money is the next email, and that was the clue that it was a scam.
Yeah.
Because it says send, yes, I need 2 $100 Google Play cards for my niece's birthday that I'm unable to go purchase now. You can get them at the local drugstore or electronics store. And then here's the real telltale that was for me. Scratch off the PIN number and send it to me via the email of this email. The email was Elizabeth's legitimate email. So he has that scammed. That's just a cover. So I sent back and I said, a couple questions though, Elizabeth. What hospital are you in? Because I will bring them to you so you can, and I'll pick up a birthday card for your niece also. Just tell me the hospital and room number. Radio silence. Haven't heard a thing since, but my wife called the church office to, I wanted to get Elizabeth's phone number. I didn't have it on my phone, and they already knew that it was a scam. I was 99% sure it was a scam at that point. So if you receive such an email or any email like that from somebody else, just be on your IQ and don't fall for it. So they can be convincing, but this one had all the telltale markings on the second go around. First go around, not so clear because they referenced a lot of things that we're familiar with Elizabeth, either knowingly or just by pure stroke of luck, because her email address is, I think, something I love walking Elizabeth or something. She's got walking in the email. So there was a clue for a scammer to use walking as an excuse to be communicated. So enough of the administrative stuff. Let me open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this glorious day. the beginning of spring, the flowers are rising, springing with new growth. Invite us today to learn more about your work in Korea and the times that were there. Be with everybody here today, especially be with those in our midst that are unable to be here for any reason, for health or any other reason. Be with them, comfort those in our congregation, for those that are in need of your comforting peace. Be with us this day as we go about our activities, and bless this presentation. Amen. And with that, Ann, would you
Sure.
do the honors to introduce our
I sure
speaker?
will. Thanks, Ted.
Oh, one thing. Sorry, I have one more. For those of you on Zoom, I will be muting you and shutting the video off so it doesn't become a distraction to the audience and everyone can pay attention to the presentation. After, when we get to Q&A session, if you want to ask a question, you can, even though I've muted you, you can unmute yourself to raise a question and open up video also if you want. So, thank you.
Okay. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
I met Sue Fry when she joined our Bible study a group a few years ago. She and her husband, Bill, had just become members of Westminster. A few months later, they both shared their experience of their trip to South Korea in Spelman Hall, and all who attended were very much impressed with their presentation. I asked them if they could repeat it for the fellowship group, and they graciously accepted. I will now ask that they give us more information on their background and the reason for their trips to different parts of the world, as well as South Korea. Here then are Sue and Bill. All yours.
Thank you, Ann.
She said, "Here's Sue and Bill." He whispered, he said, "Here's Sue and Bill," and Bill's goes, da, 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 da.
If I could ask, I see a lot of familiar faces from where we now live. Can I just have a show of hands of how many are from Narrows Grove? Okay, thank you.
Also, as we were talking to you, I realized that some of you have been to South Korea. A number of you have either missionary interests or missions in your background. So how we're going to proceed is, excuse me. You each have a little map here. You have a map. And we're going to be talking about North and South Korea from our perspective. We were there from 2011 to 2015. And I want to call your attention to, as you know, there's the DMZ here, the demilitarized zone. We'll talk about that. And there's a little island up here in the corner, up near the red. It's out here in the Yellow Sea, this little island down here. It's called Gangwon Island, and we're going to bring that to your attention too.
So, how did we get to go to South Korea? I was pastoring a church in Lancaster, California, and a Korean congregation nested in that congregation, and we got to be pretty good friends with a number of the members of that congregation, a family of whom was Nathan and Wanju Chung. And he ended up becoming ordained in the Korean Presbyterian Church and was a missionary to Indonesia for 3 years, I think. When he was in Korea, South Korea, he attended the seminary there in Seoul, and one of his instructors was Dr. Lee Kwon Soo. And she retired, but she didn't retire. She decided she was going to found a university, and she did, Juwon International University. So she contacted Nathan about coming to the school and being one of the professors there that she was looking for. And she was still looking for an Old Testament professor. And Nathan mentioned Sue, who had her PhD in Old Testament studies, specializing in Isaiah. So an invitation was extended to Sue to come to teach at JIU, and I dutifully followed my wife again internationally on a trip. Prior to going to South Korea, Sue had taught in Lithuania 2 separate semesters. While we were in, and then she was invited to Singapore and taught a time in Singapore. Then we were called to Korea. While we were in Korea, she taught in Indonesia. And then we were invited to Nepal, and she has taught in Nepal. So I visited in Lithuania. I traveled with her to Indonesia, traveled with her to Nepal, and we did 4 years in South Korea. So while in South Korea, I was unofficially the chaplain of the university there under Dr. Lee. And also I helped the pastor of the English-speaking congregation in Juan
Presbyterian Church.
Presbyterian Church, huge church, 80,000 members, if you can believe that. I mean, they had services all weekend long, just phenomenal. And they had international congregations from about a half a dozen or more countries in that church, and I helped with the English-speaking ministry. So we accepted the invitation, and we went in July of 11, and we're there until July of 2015. So that's how we got to be to South Korea.
I'm going to show a little PowerPoint with various images, and I want to say that was so fascinating. And it was 7 years ago since we were there, but while I was preparing the slides, it all came alive for me again. And I presented here before to some people, and each time, you know, there's a little morphing and taking in more. So we're going to be sharing this from our perspective. And then, of course, there's many international perspectives and political perspectives, and you come with your perspectives from your experiences, and we'll reflect on that after the PowerPoint. So we've labeled this an experience in South Korea. Here's the format. We're going to talk about places and the land. Korea is a land of contrast. Can I move over a little bit and give them more way to see the screen? Okay, can you see the screen better? Good. We're going to be talking about places and speak about Korea as a land of contrast. We're going to talk about the people we knew and what they value. A little bit more about the church and the school. And then some about Korean context, the North and the South, as it relates to our experiences. Now, we were living in the port city of Incheon, and this is the Incheon Bridge that's on the Yellow Sea. And so we landed on an island after having gone across the ocean, and the next thing we know, we're on the Yellow Sea. And from that island, we took this Incheon Bridge, which was very, very long, all the way to the city of Incheon. Now here is an image of Bill and I opposite the port of Incheon, and it was a port. And we lived in Incheon from 2011 to 2015. And as you can see, here's the entry off of that bridge to Incheon. And Incheon is the 3rd largest city in South Korea. So you can see that it was just huge. And yet we had our own little neighborhood that we lived in. There were little back alleys that were totally Asian, and it was its own world. Now this is a country scene north of Incheon. And I want to explain that South Korea is a land of contrast. So this that you see here is the entry gate to Gyeongbok Palace in Seoul. And Gyeongbok, it was the main royal palace of the Chosun dynasty, which was also referred to as the Ying dynasty. And this structure was built in 1395, and it's located in northern Seoul. And this dynasty, as I mentioned, was also called the Ying dynasty. So in Seoul, you see these very modern buildings, and then they still have the ancient structures. And see, as you can see in this image, the structures are very intricate. Now, this is a little bit of a, not a clear picture, but you can see here that there's a wall, and that's the old city wall from those times. And then you have sort of like a guard gate, and behind that you can see the tall buildings and the traffic, just like any other modern city. We went to the Queen's Palace, and these are the traditional guards at the Queen's Palace. And these are some people in some traditional Korean costumes, and we saw a Korean play. And we have here displayed, this is called hanbok. And hanbok is, they still wear these, say for weddings and special occasions, and there's a woman's hanbok and a man's attire. And so they still wear this for special occasions. But in everyday life, they dress like we do.
Tell them that they were tailor-made for us.
Oh, and these two were tailor-made for us.
And gifted to us.
And what else?
Gifted to us.
Yeah, they were a gift. Because we foreigners, we don't normally wear hanbok, but we have them. Now, we were regarded as foreigners. You know, we were very much like a little family at the school and at the church. But we actually have little cards, and our little cards said alien on the top. They were identification cards, and you had a name, and underneath it said alien. We were aliens in the foreign culture. So, but the food was terrific. And all these little side dishes are called panchan, and they come with the meal. And some of you that may have been in the Korean Army, you might remember the panchan. But here what they would do is they would take lettuce leaves and they put the different things inside the lettuce leaves, and you could grill the meat over a little grill and eat. And they have many different types of foods like this, but the panchan was free. And also in the hotels, there were tips, but in everyday restaurants, no, they did not want tips. Now, we also went to a Korean folk village, and we have a booklet here on this Korean folk village. And it was just fascinating because they had workshops and handcrafts and I thought you were going to say something.
No.
A traditional wedding ceremony, and they went into the folk beliefs of Korea. This is a man weaving straw, and it just spun real fast. He was making baskets. Now today they have the machines and they have it ready in bowls. Now, as for the people we knew and what they value, the Korean Christians honor Christmas, and the northern part of Korea is heavily influenced by Christianity, especially Seoul and Incheon. And pictured down here underneath the tree is Kwon Soon Lee, our president. You'll see pictures of her later. And these were our friends, Margaret and Soon Chung. Now, her name was Margaret Kim, and his name was Soon Chung. And it was not, it's not what they, in our culture, the women often, it's changing now, though, the women have the same name as their husband, but women in South Korea retain their family name. So sometimes when Korean women come over to the United States, especially if they're in Korean churches, there's sort of a pressure for them to adopt their the name of their husband, but yet their family name is also important. And they were very good friends of ours and introduced us to Korea. This couple, James and Joy, we met them the first week, and they were assigned to show us Incheon. So we're going around with them and we're having a good time, and they took us out to eat and we're relating. And then they confided in us that they were thinking about maybe getting married. Yes, Bill? It was terrific. So we talked to them about the ins and outs and this and that. You know, he was thinking about going to the army and she had schooling to finish, but they were thinking about getting married. And then they did get married. And this is Joy in her wedding dress. So it was quite a joy for us, just, you know, work with them through that transition. Now, at the school, there were a number of people that came to the school and they were all interested in missions. Now, in Korea, in their higher education, especially on the graduate level, they allow all different kinds of schools to exist. And this school was focused on intercultural studies. So when they have it on their certificate, international studies, it doesn't say mission, but the people that were going to the school, some of them were from Juan Presbyterian Church and they were deacons. Some of them were people in the community that thought that they were business persons and already had degrees, but thought they might want to do more with mission. And then there were people that had Masters of Divinity degrees, and they were working out on the field, and they were coming back for further education. So these were highly educated, highly motivated people. And the man in the front here with the glasses, that's Nathan Chung. And he's the young man who recommended us to come to Korea. And as he explained, I ended up being the Old Testament professor there. And Bill was the unofficial chaplain at the school, but he also helped Dr. Lee with some work that she needed done. And at the same time, he was working with the English speaking ministry at Juan Presbyterian Church. And this large church had a Chinese speaking ministry, a Nepalese speaking ministry, a Russian speaking ministry, and there were people from all over the world, you know, coming to this church. And so he assisted with that congregation and served them communion. But they had their own pastoral leader as well, who was multilingual. And then the second person, he was in Africa, and we had a chance to meet him in Africa, and he's working with a school there. He's a professor. And then the third person, he works in the Dominican Republic, but he had come to the school to teach. Just fascinating. So this is Nathan Chung and his family, and the two children are now in college. And the woman there at the end, her name is Won Ju Chung, and I have a picture of her here, and if you have a chance, come and see her picture. But no, I don't think they can see it.
Yeah, but a little bit.
Can they?
Yeah, those there. Anyway, on that.
No, no, no. So, yeah. Let's see. She is such an artist. Now I'm going to raise my voice a little bit so you can hear me, and I want you to see this. And this is her work of art, and it's called My Father's House. And she said it's not her father's actual house, but it looks like her father's house. Yes? You want to hold it for us? Okay.
You go to the mic.
I'll go to the mic. Okay. Thank you. So this was not her father's actual house, but it looks like her father's house. And it's typical of alley houses in Korea. But she had a double entendre for it. You know, in the Bible, it says, in my father's house, there are many rooms, and I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And so here's the punchline. Won Ju never had an art lesson. This was just her natural talent. And so the Korean people, many of them are artistic and have amazing abilities. And so she works in watercolor, she works in oils, she draws. It's just absolutely amazing. And so we're a fan of Won Ju and her art, and we're kind of proud that she does that. Now, these gentlemen that you see here, they were some of the original students at the school, and they have a connection with Dr. Lee. So the man forward, he is working in Japan, and he was there when they had the earthquake. And he remembers that he cried for days. And then he went out and started reaching out to the people and helping them. And he has an amazing story to tell. The next man, he worked in Malaysia, and he's a very thoughtful man. And the man after him, he worked in a part of China, and he worked with special services there. And he had a school, and his interest was suffering. And the next man, the one smiling here at the end, he was working in Kazakhstan, and they have marvelous apples. And so it was just fascinating to know these men of God. Now, these are special friends. This is the Chweth family. And the two little girls, they're now, we decided in high school, but they are Juan, and Juan there in that picture, she's age 5, and the little girl is Jua, and they were supposed to stand for a picture, but the two girls could hardly stand still. And their names mean the Lord is great and the Lord is good. And the taller one, Juan, and I, we went to MacArthur Park. There's a park in Incheon dedicated to General MacArthur, because they're grateful, very grateful for the work MacArthur did there in Incheon. And we went there together when she was 3. Now, Dr. Lee had said to me, Sue, that's exactly how she talked. Sue, I'm like, I didn't do that, but you know, it's that kind of Sue. She said, Sue, she said, I want you to be able to go up to somebody and say, I'm a Christian, how about you? And I thought, ooh, wow, okay. So I'm with her, and we're walking in the park. And we got on a little merry-go-round and swung around on that, and we're going to this, and we walked up some steps, and we're laughing and giggling, and she gets on a little wall, and she's walking on the wall like this. And I'm just walking along on the sidewalk, and I started thinking about what Dr. Lee said to me. And I thought, how am I ever going to say that? And she stops on the wall, and she looks at me, and she said, how about you? I turned my head back and laughed. If a little 3-year-old could say, how about you? But one thing I did learn to say, this is a little towel, and it says, Hananim Dongshimul Sarang Hashemida. Try it again. Hananim Dongshimul Hashemida. And it means God loves you. And so every now and then I said to someone in public, just when I say Annyeonghaseyo, which means hello, and then I'd say Hananim Dongshimul Sarang Hashemida. They'd look at me like, there was a witness. More on the Chweth family. These two little girls, when they first met them, they were this small. And the food was always a large spread like this. They love to eat, and one of the ways that they host is through dining. And the little one there with the little ribbon in her hair, she eventually called me Halmani, which means grandmother. We were walking in the snow. But what happened is that family ended up going to South Africa, where everyone speaks English. So when they came back to Korea, and I'm speaking English, and I'm older, it was believable. I must be Halmani, grandmother. So I didn't correct her. And then this is where she was when she said, how about you? This was my friend, Sunny Kim, and she taught me English, and she was my next door neighbor, and she would show me how to make Korean foods, and also we just kind of related to each other pretty well. And then this is Dr. Kwang Soon Lee with Bill and I, And she's the Reverend Dr. Kwang Soon Lee. And she was the very first woman to receive a PhD, Korean woman to receive a PhD at Fuller Theological Seminary. And she received an award from them for that. Now, Bill also taught students English, and I don't have a slide of you with students, but this is one group of women that I did teach. And so I was basically teaching the Old Testament, but occasionally I would help students with their English. And then we had people from the community would have learned English. Now, this slide is entitled The Servants. And I need to explain to you that I got my PhD in the book of Isaiah. And all of this and a dime will not get you a cup of coffee. But here's what happened. These men wanted to know about Isaiah. So the one at the end, he's from South Korea. He's in the city of Seoul, and he's a pastor, but he's interested. He did his master's degree work in Isaiah and Mark, and so he wanted to study it. All the others, they're part of the school, but they were working in different parts of the world. So the next man after him, he's in the southern part of Thailand. And the man standing up, the tall one, he is working in India. And the next man, he's working in Pakistan. And the next man, you saw his picture before, he's the one in Africa. And the one at the far end, he was working in northern Thailand. And so I would ask them questions. I would teach them about how, the book of Isaiah says that God looks down and the people are like grasshoppers. So it's really emphasizing God's sovereignty. And God's sovereignty is like this. Imagine this whole room is everything that exists. But we're part of that. God's over everything. So God, although God's over everything, God cares. We believe that God also is intimate with us. But there's also an element of God's sovereignty over individual people and over nations. So what I was asking them, I was asked what this section of Isaiah was talking about God's sovereignty in the midst of suffering. So I asked them, what suffering do you know, or tensions? And how do you see, or maybe not see, God's sovereignty in the situation? And I sat back and they taught me, and I gave them some information, and they helped me to see it with eyes that I've never seen. And we sat in a circle. Some of you may know the suffering servant passage, and the one man sat in the middle, and the suffering servant in that passage says nothing. But there's a group of people that speak, and we say, we didn't recognize this. Another group says they. Another person speaking is the I. And the different voices are speaking. And so we had them be the different voices, and the one person, the suffering servant, was saying nothing. And it was just a profound moment for all of us. And so I want to tell you that I believe that that's why I received a PhD in Isaiah. And it was by God's sovereignty. Well, we celebrated Thanksgiving Korean style at the church. And some of us in the English-speaking ministry were from the United States and some were from Canada, but a lot of the Koreans didn't know Thanksgiving. So we told them about Thanksgiving. We had a Thanksgiving feast, and it was sort of what I call, like when they blend it?
Fusion.
Fusion, yes, it was an Asian fusion. We had turkey from an army base, we had mashed potatoes, we had green beans, we had sweet and sour chicken, we had kimchi, lots of rice, noodles, Korean sweets, and pumpkin pie. Now, these two little boys were in the traditional Korean garb, and they were very attached to Bill. Now, this was Joshua Rowe, and he was the head of the English-speaking ministry at Juan Presbyterian Church. He's dressed rather casually here because we were on retreat. And then these are some friends in the Juan English-speaking ministry. We called it the JEM ministry. Now, what some of the women could do is they would do this interpretive dancing to the music, modern and traditional, and they were amazing. Now, these are two friends of mine, and the one, Christine there, she holding the white mug, she's fluent in English and got a master's degree in English, and the other one is from Canada. Now, we're going to talk about Korea in context, and this is a map that was on the school, and what they mean by the map is the church and the Christian Koreans, they're interested in outreach to the world, but the map sort of shows South Korea itself being dominated. And there's a little bit of a way when you're there that they have a tendency to think that they're the center, but you have to understand that they had been in Incheon, the English had been in there, the French had been in there, the Japanese had been in there in their earlier history. China was, a threat. And so now they have North Korea right above them. So they have a saying, which is, we are a shrimp among sharks. What do you think that might mean? We are a shrimp among sharks. We're shrimp.
Well,
I didn't hear.
too many levels.
How many
Spiritual
levels?
Level, economic level, there's so many things.
Uh-huh. Yes. And if we consider their neighbors, to the north is North Korea, threat. Then there's Russia. And then to the west and the north and the south, there's China. And to the east, there's Japan. And then they have the US troops inside their border. And so there's Russia, China, Japan, North Korea, and then our troops inside their border. So it's not that they don't appreciate Americans coming or people who help them, but they have a tendency to distrust the foreigner. And like I said, our identification card, although we were E5, high status, we were aliens. We were the foreigners. This is a satellite photo, and the bottom half is South Korea, and at night, North Korea is in darkness. And this is a NASA satellite photo. That's a real contrast.
Sure is.
Now, Myeongdong, that's a busy section of Seoul, South Korea. And I was talking with one or two gentlemen, and they were saying that Korea, one man said before, I was presented here today, he said that he saw Korea as it was just starting to get modernized before he left. And it's just as technologically advanced and modern as many cities in the world. And this is Myeongdong, and there's nightlife in Seoul with everything lit up as this satellite shows. And it's the place to shop. And Korea is, like I said before, is a contrast, highly modern and innovative, and yet also it's traditional and Eastern in its ambiance. Now we're going to get up close and personal about Korea divided, and we're going to speak about that from our perspective. This is my friend, Elizabeth Ma. And Elizabeth Ma, her family descent is from North Korea, but all of her life she's lived in China. And her father doesn't want her to say too much about being Christian because he is a high school teacher there in China, and he doesn't want to lose his position with the Communistic Party because he wants to retain his work. Elizabeth didn't seem to know much about her origin and she was talking to me, and she was saying, I have my race, and I have there was a race, her ethnicity, her citizenship, and she'd come over to South Korea, in order to earn more money because she wants to buy a home in China. But she didn't seem to know too much about North Korea. And she was talking to me as if, well, I could just come over there and I could go to Beijing with her. And then I could take a train with her and I could go over to this little city. And from that city, we could go down and we could see this mountain in North Korea. We never did, but this was her thinking. Now, this is Reverend Dr. Kwang Soon Lee, and she's the president of the school. And she remembers the time she was a child during the time of the war between the North and the South. And one time at a church, she took us into a room, and I met the former generals from that era that were still alive, that were, Bill and I both, that were from South Korea. Bill, jump in at any time here. Now, this is, I pointed out to you, the Ganghwa Island, that little island. And the first year at the school, Dr. Lee took the students and faculty to what was called the Reunification Center of Ganghwa Island. And I'm going to tell you what I saw. Now, this experience that I had, it seems like a dream, but it really happened. And I'm going to start by just reading part of my journal entry about it, and then I'll just talk freely. And Dr. Lee told me that I was free to share everything. And she said, don't leave anything out. I wrote, on October 31st, we observed the Protestant Reformation. The entire student body, Dr. Lee, Pastor Park, Elder Kim, and all the faculty of JIU visited 5 sites where the Protestant churches were first built in Korea. So that's what we were, examining. And the brochure about our tour is written in Korean. However, I think I caught on to the general gist of what was going on, even though the brochure was in Korean. And the 4th site we visited was the Ganghwa Peace Observation Deck on Ganghwa Island. And we had to walk uphill a little way to reach the center. And at first we went into the Reunification Hope Center. And Dr. Lee, Pastor Park, Bill, and I each wrote prayers to hang on a little tree. And Dr. Lee, and I think it was a place to hang on the tree your thoughts about what you think about reunification. And Dr. Lee instructed me to write a prayer on behalf of Juwon International University. So in my head, I sent up a real quick arrow prayer for God to give me what to write. So I wrote, we pray in the name of Jesus Christ for the unification of North and South Korea without violence. Juwon International University, Dr. Sue Fry. Now at the time, that was their great hope. And Koreans have many, many, many views about this. But at the time I wrote it, Dr. Lee said that this was the same prayer that she and Pastor Park had. But Dr. Lee let me know about that, but I had no idea. And then she took me up to an elevator to a North Korean observation room. Now I'm in this room and it's slanted. Think of an auditorium with seats like this. And I'm sitting like this. And at the front of the room where the speaker is, the walls are curved and they're glass. And I'm sitting there and Dr. Lee is saying to me, she's whispering, and she said, do you see that river in there? And I go like this. She goes, there are no fish. There are no one fishes on either side of the river. Now, I don't know if I can't remember if she said there were no fish, but she said, no one can fish. So I looked across the way and she said, this is where, and I could see, a little bit, I could see some brown. She said, that's where the North Koreans produce 1/3 of their rice. But she said the trees, some of them have been cut down because many of the Koreans had to cut down their trees to get warmth or light because they were lacking it. And so she said that at night it's dark there and Korea is all lit up. Now, yes, probably somebody could say you Koreans spend way too much on electricity at night, but there's a real contrast as I showed in the previous picture. So then what happened is she left and all these people rushed to the windows and I hadn't noticed, but there were little telescopes there. But I thought I can't, negotiate that crowd. So I started walking down the steps and she wanted me to meet her on another floor, but we got separated from each other. So I walked outside and I was in a grassy area and I saw this monument and the monument was about the reunification of families because during the war, families were split up and some families are in North Korea, some were in South Korea. Now many family members may have died, but there was a hope for families to also be reunited. So then I came over and I saw one of those little telescopes. And the way to describe it was when I was a child, the family used to go to Lake Erie and you could put a little coin in and you could look through the telescope and you could see across, I'm calling it a telescope, but you could see across the way and I could see the other side of Lake Erie. So somebody put the Korean money in there and I looked and I saw North Korea. So I saw the brownish, what must have been rice. I saw trucks, maybe 2 people. I looked at the trees and they were all stripped. They were bare. I couldn't see any bark. And then Dr. Lee came down onto the knoll area and we all gathered around and we were silently looking, sort of praying in a circle, a group of us. And Dr. Lee turns around and she walks and she faces the north and we all put our hands out like this. And we are praying for North Korea. Then we turned around and we turned the other way. And Koreans always want to take pictures. 2 Korean students want to take pictures of everybody. They want to always capture the moment. I kept my eyes closed. I'm like this. And then what happened spontaneously, Bill was in another part of the line, but the 2 gentlemen on either side, they raised their hand like this. And we were all standing with our heads in the air, worshiping God. And we came back and, we were very talkative on the way there. And they weren't quite so talkative on the way back because it was a lot to process. This man, his Danish name is Johannes, and his Korean name is Kim Ji-won, and he has a powerful story. Bill?
My turn?
Yeah.
Yeah, Johannes lived in Pyongyang at the beginning of the war. There was at least his grandmother, his father, and his sister. And when things were getting bad, they wanted to leave Pyongyang. Johannes and his father left. The grandmother was not able to make the trip, and the sister stayed behind to stay with grandmother. So Johannes told the story of traveling south, and it was horrible. He said there were lines as far as you could see, and then there would be shooting and bodies would be falling all over everywhere, and they would literally have to walk over dead bodies as they continued their walk to the south, to Seoul. He and his father reached Seoul, And then they made their way to Incheon. And as an enterprising young teen, he delivered papers. And he would get from one part of Incheon to another by jumping on trains and having the train transport him. One day, he didn't quite make it onto the train, and he lost his leg. And he was lying there bleeding to death when this Danish gentleman came by and took him to the ship that was in the harbor there called the Jutlanda. Jutlandia. It was a hospital ship that the Danish government had there to help with the people hurt with the war. And this Johannes, Danish gentleman, transfused his blood to Johannes, which is why Johannes took his name as his English name, saved his life. Johannes talks about how he thought he had died and gone to heaven, because when he opened his eyes, there were all these white people in white uniforms and everything else. And then he found out, no, he was on a ship. And he recovered and grew up, obviously, because there he is. And he kept the connection with the Danish people and was invited by the Danish government to come over and receive an award for being an ambassador, if you will, about the war and everything else. And Johannes would say, I need to give you the award for what you did for me specifically and for us Korean in South Korea with that hospital ship that you had there. And so he traveled to Denmark. He asked me to proof the speech that he wanted to give, which was very insightful for me to be able to do. And we got to be very close friends. He loved steak. So he always took us to a steakhouse. And it was always a wonderful experience to hear his testimony and to hear his story. And it's just one of many stories. And they talk about the unification. He still wonders whether his sister is alive. Of course, he knows his grandmother has since passed. But a concern for the older people in South Korea and perhaps North Korea too is that the younger people have no real interest so much in unification because they don't know the separation that the older generation knows of having people left behind in North Korea and the desire to be united with them because their whole life has been in South Korea with their intact families. So it's really becoming a concern for the older Koreans to keep alive that desire for reunification. It's about 5 minutes till. I mean, I could go on with a whole lot of other stuff, not so much with Johannes, but a very powerful story there. But perhaps there's some questions or comments you may have. Yes, sir.
Did you ever fear in terms of your own safety being in Korea, South Korea?
No, truthfully not. Now, my family had fears. I can, because we were there when South Korea bombed the island and there were people killed and there was there was a flock of correspondents coming into Seoul, Korea, wondering what was going to go on. And my sister Grace goes, "When are you coming home. you know? And I said, no time soon. You know, just, she just didn't understand how I wasn't concerned. But no. And part of the reason why is we taught a Sunday school class, Bible class. And I asked the class, I said, how are you feeling about this? You know, and they said, we've lived with this for 60 years. Now, if it wasn't the grandfather or the father or the grandson, you know, one of the three, always there was this cycle. Things are bad in North Korea. We need help. We're going to threaten this, that, and the other thing. And the help comes in to North Korea. I said, this isn't anything new. Yes, a couple people did get killed on the island, and that was not a good thing. But it really wasn't that different than it's been for 60 years. I said, but it seems like it's different. He said, if you talk to people on the street, you will find out that it isn't a big deal to most South Koreans. And then I likened that to when I was in junior high and we had the missile crisis. You know, some people really got into it and were making the, you know, dugouts and the bomb shelters. And for the most part, we went on with our regular daily life and, you know, not getting covered like that was going to help us kind of deal. So I never felt like, gee, I got to get out of here when we were there. Yes, sir.
What percentage of South Korea are Christians? And can you give a general breakdown of the other religions, the percent?
I should look that up. No, I'm not high. Let me do a quick look. And what is your question, sir?
My question was, if you go to South Korea, how many people speak English?
A good many of them. And everything, all signage is English and Korean and sometimes even Chinese. Is there another question? Yes, Gene.
How did you and Sue initially communicate with the Koreans?
In English.
At the school, people spoke English.
Oh,
Okay, and at the church, where the circles we were in, they spoke English. I memorized 25 expressions initially to get around town, and I got to the point where I could speak real simple sentences.
Bill.
But-
Okay,
they learned your language before you learned theirs.
I never learned theirs. So yes, they, yeah. Did you?
No, I was looking up the same thing you, I
Okay.
found 35% Christian. Of that, it's 24% Protestant, 10%, 11% Catholic, 11% Korean Buddhist, and 54% no religion.
No religion. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I guess nowhere on earth is there a greater comparison between a totalitarian communist dictatorship and a prosperous capitalistic democracy. And I'm wondering, is there any ethnic or cultural differences between North and South that allow the Northerners to tolerate this that Southerners would never tolerate?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, no, I want you to be clear.
Well, I'm not going to be quiet.
Well,
You go ahead.
the one thing I was thinking is the North Koreans, I can't quite think of a cultural difference, and Bill may, but basically the North Koreans have been exposed to propaganda. So there's a very, very strong propaganda machine about Kim Jong-un, the other Korean leaders that were before him, and what North Korea signifies. And so that has created a culture in and of itself.
Another thing that is a factor in this reunification is the South Korean the young people really know how well they have it. And they know that it would be a big hit to them economically and everywhere other way if there was unification, because North Korea is so, dare I say the word, backward and oppressed, that a lot of the young people aren't really that thrilled with the idea of having to, if you will, share.
Sort of like East and West Germany when they reunited.
Yes. Similar. And I mean, and the cultures are, you know, separating, you know, the languages are a little bit, there's different, you know, a dialect. And even though it's all Korean, sometimes it's a little hard to, between the two groups. Not that there's a lot of movement back and forth, because there isn't, but occasionally there will be some that manage to get to South Korea.
Do you see any prospect where North Korea's dictatorship is going to collapse, or is it locked in place as long as the Chinese support it?
Well, definitely if the Chinese keep going. But I mean, right now, I didn't even know that the President Kim had a child. You know, so there would be a question as to succession. And, things are so different now, 11 years after we went over there, with how things are in the world with, you know, Iran and, you know, China and Russia getting more palsy-wowsy, and Iran and, you know, and North Korea is a lot more active now than they were when we were over there. And so there are concerns that way. Without Russia supporting them, I don't see how they would. I mean, yeah, China, I don't see how they would continue personally. Yes,
Bill, were you and Sue allowed to go into North Korea?
no,
No one was allowed.
no. We did get to the DMZ.
I sure about that just real quick.
Oh, if you want to.
Okay, I'm just gonna say this real quick because I want to be sensitive to our time and hear your questions. But it accesses your question, and this woman here, this little woman, she has a very powerful ministry. I'm so awed by God's choice. And what she does is she is a chaplain to South Korean soldiers. And then there's a place in Seoul where South Korean generals come and pray with her. So she took us into what abuts. There's a demilitarized zone, and there's a map here to show you, but there's a demilitarized zone, and there's a place where South Korea also has a place where civilians can't pass. So we were up in there, and she took us. We could not go to the army station because of the MERS epidemic. They didn't want, otherwise we would, but we could go into this area because we were with her. So we did get to go to this place called Dorsan Station. It's a train station. This picture here is from the internet. And do you see it says to Pyongyang? Like on your way to the capital of, but we're in South Korea. And then this is this other picture over here. This is my picture. And it says to Pyongyang. And these are the railroad tracks in back of it. And we were able to go there. And what happens is trains come from North Korea to South Korea. If there's a dignitary, somebody important from North Korea that wants to come to the South, they'll go there. I don't know if it's vice versa. So this was built around the time of President Bush. And so we saw this. And so I don't have a photo of it, but I kind of went like this, like going my way. I decided to act like total tourist because there was a guard watching us. Like, what? Hi, y'all, you know. So very, very powerful. And then the Koreans are so artistic. And one of the men, Sam Kim, at a dinner, he went like this with paper and he handed me a rose. It's up here, a little rose. And so we put the rose next to this flower and it looks like an actual rose, but it's just his Korean paper folding art. Origami, but he just did it. He's just sitting there while that handed me a rose. So any other
Do we
questions?
need
or-
to cut it off for those who may need to leave, and we'll be happy to stay
Yeah.
longer, but you need to.
We
close
want to
out,
be
Ken.
sensitive to your
This can,
time.
this can stay up and Sue and Bill are available to chat more for those who would like. Those who have a need to leave and have other appointments to attend to, feel free to leave, but also feel free to stay if you want.
Can we browse around the table?
Yes,
Oh, no, we
exactly.
just put it up here
Absolutely.
just so you know. Take a look at this and wonderful things. Thank you, Bill and Sue. Thank you very much.